In today's episode, we'll talk about an avatar of Vishnu that doesn't get as much attention as the other, more popular Dashavatars or 10 avatars. We are going to talk about Hayagriva, who is part human, part horse, but not exactly a centaur. Quite the opposite, in fact. Welcome to Stories from India. This is a podcast that will take you on a journey through the rich mythology, folklore, and history of the Indian subcontinent. I am Narada Muni, the celestial storyteller and the original Time Lord. With my ability to travel through space and time, I can bring you fascinating stories from the past, the present, and the future. From the epic tales of the Mahabharata and Ramayana to the folk tales of the Panchatantra, to stories of Akbar Birbal and Tenali Raman, I have a story for every occasion. The purpose of the stories is neither to pass judgment nor to indoctrinate. My goal is only to share these stories with people who may not have heard them before, and to make them more entertaining for those who have. There are a few different variations of this avatar of Vishnu. We'll go through one popular version today. The story begins with Hayagriva, but this Hayagriva is not the Hayagriva who was Vishnu. Instead, he was another Hayagriva. This is going to get very confusing. So let me see if I can simplify things. Hayagriva literally means someone with the neck of a horse. And by neck, the head is also implied. So someone with the neck and head of a horse and the body of a human. Sort of like an inverted centaur, if you think about it. Where the confusion comes from is that there are two different Hayagrivas in this story. We'll simply avoid this confusion by naming them Evil Hayagriva and Good Hayagriva. So let us first go to the scene where Evil Hayagriva was born. The location is Rishi Kashyap's home. Kashyap is a Saptarishi, or one of the 7 Hall of Fame rishis. We have met him before on this podcast. Kashyap's home was a sprawling one. It had to be. You see, Kashyap had a large family. And by large, I really mean large. At least a dozen wives and several children by each wife. Kashyap's family was so large and each of his children so famous that it makes Genghis Khan look like a mere beginner by comparison. Anyway, Kashyap was with his wife Danu, and Danu was about to give birth. The ultrasound had been a little inconclusive. Or maybe the ultrasound technician had been too worried about upsetting the parents. But she need not have worried. Kashyap had seen it all. One of his children was the ocean itself. Another was part bird and part man. And others included astronomical bodies. So Kashyap didn't even raise an eyebrow when he stared at the face of his newborn son. His son was horse-faced. And I don't mean that his face resembled a horse's. his son had the actual head and neck of a horse. And as if to dispel any ambiguity anyone might have had, the baby whinnied and neighed. Kashyap calmly said that they should all get a move on. He was ready to name his son. He was ready to sign on the birth certificate application form. And he was ready to leg it to the other operating room in this hospital, where he had two more children who were ready to be born this morning. And the name Kashyap came up with was Hayagriva. Danu had an objection to that. Hayagriva only meant someone with the neck of a horse. But their boy had the head of a horse too. So quit fooling around, she told him. Kashyap first commended her for her excellent dad joke, even though dad jokes were his territory. Then he patiently explained that names were important. How would it be far in the future if someone read his business card or his resume and judged him too harshly for it? He'd become the centaur of attention for all the wrong reasons. On the other hand, the name Hayagriva did not necessitate that the head was horse-like too, while providing some plausible deniability to the parents, in case anyone accused them of giving their child a misleading name.
So, what will it be? Yea or nay?
He asked her. Danu agreed with her husband's wisdom, despite the poor quality of his humor. Not for nothing was he a Saptarishi. Hey, Hayagriva, Danu said affectionately, addressing her baby. The baby, already well versed in human language apparently, nodded his head vigorously. He'd certainly appreciate a meal of cut and dried grass. Maybe throw in a dash of oats to go with it, he seemed to say. And that's what happened. On a stable diet of hay and oats, evil Hayagriva grew stronger every day. He was disciplined about not eating any fast food. Fast food, in evil Hayagriva's opinion, was reserved for racehorses. And he wasn't a racehorse. All he would eat, it was just healthy food for him. Although he did indulge in the occasional mayonnaise to go with his bread. And even then, he stuck to the thorough brand. Yup, thoroughbred was the most nutritious bread for horses, as their advertisement said. As evil Hayagriva grew up, he started socializing with the neighboring children. Most evenings, he'd be playing with them late, until Danu came to remind him. It's past your bedtime, she'd say. As he transitioned from childhood into youth, evil Hayagriva started getting visions of grandeur. He had to be top dog, or top horse, top boy, of not just the neighborhood, but of the whole world. But he didn't know what to do about it. How does one become king of the world? There didn't seem to be any elections he could announce his candidature for. And he couldn't think of a mega-villain plot to threaten the United Nations with space lasers or something. For one thing, there were no space lasers. And there was no United Nations. Back then, in ancient India, evil Hayagriva's worried expression caught his mom's attention. Why the long face? She asked him. It's obvious you're chomping at the bit about something. Your attitude is all negative lately, and not just because you're saying nay all the time. Evil Hayagriva ignored all the obvious puns and evaded her questions and all her follow up questions. He explained that he wasn't feeling saddled with too much responsibility. And no, he didn't have cold feet about the future. No, he wasn't worried about impressing the girls/mares. And yes, Mom, he could dance. It was not like he had two left feet, like most other horses. Danu could tell that her boy wasn't going to confide in her. So, she gave him some very generic advice. You know what I do when I feel down? When the dog barks, when the bee stings, and when I'm feeling sad and all that?
Let me guess.
Evil Hayagriva said.
You begin singing that song from the sound of music.
No, no, no. Nothing that fancy, Danu replied. Besides, that movie is millennia in the future. No, I just pray to Goddess Durga. Give that a thought. Maybe it'll work for you the way it works for me. Evil Hayagriva thought that it couldn't hurt to try. Worst case, it may not rein in his worries, but at least it wouldn't stir up more trouble. So the very next day, evil Hayagriva began praying to Goddess Durga. We've met this goddess before on this show, but in case you forgot or you missed those earlier episodes, I'll just say that Durga is an avatar of Shakti and also that of Parvati, Shiva's partner. She's a very powerful goddess, and that makes it likely that if someone prays to her and asks her for a wish, they're going to end up with some kind of a superpower at the end of it. And that's precisely what happened. It took several years of prayers on a lonely mountain top in the Himalayas. But evil Hayagriva kept at it. You might wonder, everyone who prays to the gods and goddesses for years, how do they manage? It's a good question, but in evil Hayagriva's case, the answer was pretty simple. He was financially stable, given his prestigious roots. So while he prayed for many years, there were bags and bags of oats and barley regularly delivered to him. Many years later, Durga appeared before him on that mountain top. She told him that she was impressed by his dedication and discipline and patience. What was it that he wanted? Evil Hayagriva was ready with his answer because he had rehearsed this in his mind many times. He said that he wanted to ensure no one could defeat him in battle. And by no one, he meant absolutely no one. Vishnu, Shiva, and Brahma included. He even wanted it so that Shiva, who was the destroyer of the entire universe, would be unable to defeat him. Please, that's all I want, he said. Durga replied, You and everyone else. No can do, kid. That would be a very foolish thing to expect. Or foolish, if you prefer. There's always got to be a fine print. Wishes just don't work otherwise.
Fine, Evil Hayagriva said. Then make it so that the only one who can defeat me is Hayagriva.
Deal, Durga said, and disappeared instantly before Evil Hayagriva could change his mind. Evil Hayagriva was happy. His mom had often told him there was no one else like him in the universe. She was sure of it because she had asked Kashyap. And Kashyap replied that if there really was another horse-headed person in existence, he'd have known about it already. She didn't expect him to lose track of all his children, did she? Durga, meanwhile, didn't just go off to the person on the next mountain in the Himalayas who had also been praying to her. Instead, she went to Vishnu's home. As it happens, I was there when Durga turned up. She didn't even have to explain anything. Vishnu knew exactly why Durga had come, and further, he knew what he had to do.
Narad, do you want to come along?
He asked me. Well, of course I wanted to go along. But first, Vishnu said that he had to change.
How does this look suit me?
He asked a little while later, and I observed then that his head had changed into that of a horse. I had to admit, Vishnu looked dashing in any of his avatars. With the head of a very majestic horse, his eyes simply sparkled and they inspired. I don't have a better way to describe it, but you probably know by now how much of a Vishnu fanboy I am. We went down to earth and landed right where evil Hayagriva was standing. He was on some kind of a stage in one of the entertainment capitals in the country. Never mind where. Then I suddenly realized it wasn't a stage. It was a boxing ring. A boxing ring that was actually square. But that didn't matter. Evil Hayagriva, loudly proclaiming himself the Lord of the universe. No one could beat him, he said. And the growing pile of people behind him that he had beaten up proved his point, he added. Vishnu, as good Hayagriva, calmly entered the ring. The audience let out a collective gasp. Evil Hayagriva versus good Hayagriva. This had to be the match of the millennium. Everyone edged closer to the ringside. But as you can imagine, space was fairly limited. The poor unfortunate souls who weren't here to observe this fight were in the next stadium over. They were instead watching a mixed martial arts cage fight between a couple of rich men. There may be massive appeal to a person of the masses in watching two billionaires beating each other up, but it was hardly the spectacle that the Hayagriva versus Hayagriva fight seemed to be headed towards. It was the main event. Pun intended. Hayagriva versus Hayagriva might sound like a very even competition. Something where the outcome might be hard to predict, given how the two belligerents were neck and neck. But you would be wrong, because good Hayagriva was Vishnu. And I'm not just saying that because I'm president for life of the Vishnu fan club. It's true, I chant his name all the time, and I'm constantly singing his praises. But I like to think I'm being very objective when I'm doing that. And Vishnu is just simply awesome.
Now hold your horses,
The referee seemed to say. But evil Hayagriva paid no attention, and he rushed upon good Hayagriva. The only thing that good Hayagriva did was to place his little finger on evil Hayagriva's shoulders, and that seemed to check evil Hayagriva's intent of tearing his opponent apart, limb from limb. Good Hayagriva seemed almost bored, even as evil Hayagriva was grunting with all his strength, just to lift the weight of good Hayagriva's pinky.
need more horsepower,
Grunted evil Hayagriva. Good Hayagriva asked out of genuine concern for his opponent.
Would you like to try using a forklift?
But evil Hayagriva collapsed to the floor at this point.
I've fallen, and I can't giddy up,
He gasped as the referee began counting down.
I'm sorry, did you say something?
Good Hayagriva asked. But evil Hayagriva did not reply. He had gasped his last, and he now lay there motionless, a victim of overexertion. You might think that those who had bought massively overpriced entry tickets to watch this fight were disappointed that it was over before it had even begun. After all, they hadn't even seen good Hayagriva throw a single punch. But hey, it was still totally worth it to see Vishnu in person. They got quite a kick out of it. This was one event that the audience talked about for decades and passed on the stories to their grandchildren over cozy fireside chats. A few punters who had been foolish enough to bet on evil Hayagriva had to pony up. Vishnu returned home after that, and I went on again, amazed by how perfectly Vishnu had neutralized another threat to the universe. That's it for this time. A few notes. There are many alternative stories of Hayagriva. In one of them, it wasn't evil Hayagriva, but two asurs who were overcome by good Hayagriva. The two asurs, Madhu and Kaitab, had actually originated from Vishnu, from his earwax. No wonder there wasn't much good in them. They stole the Veds from my dad, Brahma the creator, and then they hid them in the ocean. Let's just say Vishnu, in his good Hayagriva form, splintered them apart, and the two asurs became some of the tectonic plates on our planet. In some parts of India, Hayagriva is regarded as part of Vishnu's 10 avatars. In other parts, not so much. But don't really worry about this number. Vishnu is not limited to 10 avatars. There are many, many more. Another version has it that good Hayagriva was an accompanying avatar to Vishnu's Matsya avatar. We saw the Matsya avatar in our very first episode, Unicorn Fish. But in many of these variations of the story, evil Hayagriva is stealing the Veds, which are very important historical documents in Indian mythology and history. The purpose of stealing them was so that he could become immortal. That didn't work, because Vishnu, as good Hayagriva, took care of that easily enough. Next time, we'll see some wisdom from Birbal in Akbar's court, as he finds a way to provide a fitting reply to the emperor's questions. Thank you all for the comments on social media and on Spotify's Q&A. I can't directly reply to the questions there, but I'll address them here on this show. Thank you Rez and Vamsi for the kind words. Maya and Rohak, you asked for an Akbar Birbal story, and that's exactly what we are doing next week. If you have any other comments or suggestions, or if there are particular stories that you'd like to hear, please do let me know by leaving a comment or a review on the site sfipodcast.com, or tweet at sfipodcast, or reply to the questions on Spotify's Q&A. You can also find me on Instagram and Facebook. Be sure to subscribe to the show to get notified automatically of new episodes. A big thank you to each and every one of you for your continued support and your feedback. The music is from purpleplanet.com. That's purple-planet.com. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you next time.